first sentence in the paragraph says a student receiving unfair treatment.
Maybe bring forward their grievance, yeah, because I'm assuming if they want to take on the dress code policy, it's
They feel
because
they-
they're
yeah.
feeling
Okay.
that
They're
the
in the dark to feel the same. Always in your dreams you hear my voice singing in your head. My darkness calls, I ran through the street calling out your name. Met you in the dark to feel the same. Always in your dreams you hear my voice singing in your head. My darkness calls, here in your temptation, pounding hearts, they speak too soon. This awkward, anxious tension builds up in this quiet room. I'm fueling up my vision just to build up and decide. One more lust conviction, one more kissing suicide. Take me for a fool, don't mistake me. Lately I've been really hard to find. Free me from these changes I'm needing, holding all of this yearning on the inside. Darling, let your secrets out. Confess. Teach me all those things I don't know yet. Take me for a fool, don't mistake me. Lately I've been really hard to find. Free me from these changes I'm needing, holding all of this yearning on the inside.
If we didn't have a policy that said it needed to be approved and offered to all students, that they could pick and choose. It could be, I only want to give it to Lynn English High School, to female
Redheads
students.
who are under
Exactly.
5 feet tall, exactly. So they could pick every single category in here that is protected by law and still give out scholarships based on things.
Hard to find. Free me from these changes I'm needing, holding all of this yearning on the inside. Take me for a fool, don't mistake me. Lately I've been really hard to find. Free me from these changes Palpitation, pounding hearts, they speak too soon.
that grows, you make me feel And then
Good evening, everybody. So I'm Dr. Detuya. I'm the Administrator of Special Education. I'm here to present on SPED Update and then also TFM. I'm also accompanied by Jess McLaughlin, who's the Deputy Administrator, and also Charlie Gallo, who is a compliance. So they've been here a little bit longer than I have, so in case there are some questions that I might not have the answer to, I'm going to be relying on them for some information. So moving along, again, we're just going to talk about a little snapshot of the SPED information so that way you can kind of get a better understanding about the department and what we're all about. Then we'll look at some outside placements to look at that information as well, followed by an overview of TFM, which we have a progress report that's due tomorrow, so I'll be working on that with Charlie in the morning. And then just some Q&A, but you're welcome to ask any questions, during the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. I think you also have copies of the presentation there. You likely also have copies of the TFM action plan, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. And if there are any questions again on those, just please feel free to let me know. So first of all, just looking at SPED in general, a snapshot currently, and this is data as of August. The data obviously changes daily. But we have about 3,400 students that are on IEPs and that are receiving services. Of those, that represents about 20% of the overall population within Lynn Public Schools. About 2% are service only. So that means those are students that are just receiving services within the district. They may or may not be an actual Lynn student, and they're just receiving like maybe speech services or something like that, within the district. Then we have about 59% of the students are receiving their IEPs in full inclusion. We'll talk in a few minutes too about the different type of placement settings. And then partial inclusion are about 5%. Substantially separate is 28%. And then for students that are in outside placements are 3%. And there's a separate slide to talk about those in a few minutes. So when we talk about our IEP compliance rate, and this is also, I really appreciate how Dr. Shorter talked about it, and I even mentioned it when I had my original interviews. All this data is public information, so it's pretty easy to get online. Sometimes you have to dig through different, levels of information, but the point is that it's really important to be able to see that because those, and especially continue to monitor that data over time, because those are indicators, obviously, of where we're headed, and then we can make changes. So when we look at our IEP compliance rate, we're at about 68% compliant. So that means within the timelines that are mandated by, by regulation. So we have a few that have been rejected, some of which the consent hasn't been signed. So meaning when a caregiver wants to begin the process, they'll request for an evaluation. The district then is required to provide a documentation to them to be able to sign that they, consent to it. So when we've sent it out and the consent hasn't been signed, that puts us out of compliance. So that to me is just a clear indicator that, and a lot of times this happens over the summer too, because somebody had put out, a request and then, the summer happened and people aren't working and it gets picked up later. But the point is that we can certainly figure out ways to be able to contact caregivers and figure out how we can reduce that particular number. And then the last one are the ones that are overdue. So typically that's, let's say, the meeting hasn't occurred within the time frame, or maybe the meeting has occurred, but the IEP itself hasn't been written. So again, those are other areas of opportunity that we can look at. So hopefully when we have the next update, we're going to see a little bit of changes in those particular numbers. So moving on, this just gives you a snapshot of the different categories that we have for individuals that qualify for special education. There's also a link at the bottom of the page that you're welcome to visit. Again, that's on DESE's website, and it gives you those definitions if you want to drill down a little bit more into what each one of those means. But it just shows that we have a broad variety of different categories for students for the types of disabilities that we're supporting them in within the educational environment. So I talked a moment about the different settings. So what I wanted to do was give you a little bit more information in case you're not already aware Inclusion is the way that the district is moving. And I have to say that I'm really impressed with Lynn, because there are a lot of inclusion programs that we have in inclusion seats. And inclusion just means that, and that's the goal that we want to try to get to be able to provide those services to students with general education, so they're not being ostracized, not being pulled out. You know, they're getting that in an inclusion setting, included with their other like peers. That's one of the settings. Resource is the kind of like the historical pull-out service where a student leaves the classroom, and sometimes the issue with that is that they're losing out on instructional time. So if you think about it, even back to when we were all in elementary school, you know, you'd see the resource teacher pick up a couple of students, then you go to another classroom, pick up some more, go to another, pick up some more, and they march into some room somewhere. They're losing out on instructional time. So inclusion is really the way that we want to be able to go, to be able to help provide those services in the classroom. And frankly, when that's happening, the teacher who's providing those inclusion services can even pick up some of the other students that might be having difficulty, which helps us when we talk about Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions within the MTSS model. And then the final one is self-contained or substantially separate. So those are students that require a much higher level of support. So they receive all of their services, or nearly all, within a self-contained classroom, which is separate. So you tend to find that, like in, let's say, in some behavior programs, but also in some life skills programs, where the need that they have is so specific that therefore they're receiving that all in a substantially separate environment. And then I just have on there a number of different specialized programs that we have within LPS. So when you think about the previous slide and the different categories of disability, based upon those disabilities, they might be receiving services in one of those programs that are scattered in different buildings throughout the district. So outside placements, I think the most important thing to think about is not necessarily the number or even the cost of what we're paying, but it's that they are Lynn students. So they're entitled to be able to be they're part of the community. They're entitled to be able to be integrated and access the different programs that we have. But the reality is that based upon the type of services that they require, and the inability to be able to find that particular programming within the district, we end up looking for outside placements. And usually what happens is that it's so specialized that we may not have a program for it, and the most effective option is moving into an out-of-district placement. But the reality is that it ends up costing a lot of money. The student is being using transportation, is now moving somewhere outside of the district, so it pulls them away from the daily interactions of what's going on in the community. And then what happens is that over time, we start to find that we have a lot of students that are going to a particular program, and that's really a signal for us to be able to figure out how can we create that programming within the district, so we can bring those kids back in, and then they can be, again, more integrated within the school population. And this number also changes over time. We might find that some students graduate out, some students come back in the district, some students go, into an out-of-district placement. Sometimes we have students that move in from a different district that were already in out-of-district placement, and they continue in that placement. And that's where you have, if you've heard of fiscal responsibility and programmatic responsibility, typically if a student comes from a different district, they move into our district, we end up being
on the spirit.
Responsible, just depending upon when it happens. But the point is that, so the number ends up changing. And that's why you see that there are 8 students that we are fiscally responsible for, because they left our district, went elsewhere. We retain the fiscal responsibility, even though we're not responsible for the programming. So in fiscal year 23, we spent approximately $14 million on outside placements. And when you break that down based upon the students, that's approximately $122,000 per student. When you compare that to data on DESE around how much we're paying per student, we're spending about $16,000 per student for education. So, and again, for some students, it might be that that is the most effective placement for them to be. And what we want to make sure is that we're providing the right type of service in the right type of setting. But again, as I mentioned before, we might find that we have a number of students which we might be able to bring back into the district to provide that programming, which is something that we're going to look on over time. And that takes time, right? Because, we want to make sure that we have the programming that's there, we have the buy-in from the caregivers, we have the IEP meetings, and that we have collaboration in those discussions. So what I put on there is something called circuit breaker, which individuals may or may not be familiar with. Sometimes people say, well, yeah, we spend $14 million, but circuit breaker pays us back. And the reality is that circuit breaker is a way for districts to be reimbursed for these types of expenses. But I put a note on there. It's really just 75% of qualifying expenses over a certain threshold. So the reality is that out of that $14 million that we spent, we only had $4 million that was reimbursed. So it still ends up being a very cost heavy, way of providing education. So it's a way for us to, again, to sort of figure out ways that we can do it much more effectively and also in an integrated way so that the students can be more integrated with the community. So the next part is about TFM, and I think you have there a copy too of the action plan. So tiered focus monitoring is just a way that districts and schools are able to be held accountable for what they do. So what happens is that every 3 years, DESE, and I'll talk about it in a minute, there are these different categories or groups of indicators that they're looking at. And it's really tied to student outcomes, and they're in the area of special ed and also compliance, which are very integrated, between the two. And what happens sometimes is that they could lead to corrective action, which is why we have that particular action plan. And what I was mentioning earlier is that we can use a lot of these data points if we continue to take data over time to be able to help indicate where we need to go. So that way we end up avoiding getting into a situation where we have an action plan because we're being proactive rather than reactive. So tiered focus monitoring, as I mentioned, has these two different groups, one of which is more special ed focused, one of which is civil rights focused, but they're really not two mutually exclusive categories. They're really integrated. It's just that there are so many indicators that DESE is looking at that they break it out into two different categories. And what you have on the right-hand side is just kind of like a wheel, right? Which is indicating that cycle, that it starts out with a self-assessment where the districts assess themselves, provide that data into DESE, then it comes up with a report, and then based upon those outcomes, the district might be indicated that they have to create an action plan because there are certain areas that they might have been low in. So, and that's where we see in this particular slide. So when we look at the different indicators, out of all of those indicators, and there are a lot, actually Lynn did pretty well because there were only two particular areas, CR3 and CR10C, which I'll go into a minute, which are the areas that we were cited for, that we then had to create an action plan. But the reality is that of all of those, it was just those particular two. And then when we drill down a bit more and we talk about CR3, that's access to full range of educational programs. So that means, and you can also see it in the data, where we unfortunately have a higher number of students that are receiving services in more substantially separate settings or in less inclusive settings than what the state requires or prefers. So therefore, they're saying that we're just not providing sufficient access to students across those range of educational programs. So what I have on there is just an overview of what the action plan is. So what you have in the document that was provided to you, I just put it into kind of a way that my brain can understand it, and hopefully it makes it a little bit more palatable for everybody on the committee. But basically, there are these different planned dates or these deliverable dates, but they're really not hard and fast dates. What I have at the bottom is the expected date of completion. And the one thing that I wanted to mention on here is that the ones that have an asterisk are the ones that have that expected completion date at the end. The ones that don't have an asterisk are the ones that DESE is looking for us to provide some type of update on or some type of an artifact or example when we do our progress reports. And our progress reports happen at different times of the year. As I mentioned, there's one tomorrow. I have another slide that talks about those dates. But it's all integrated, right? Because we're all working towards something, with the final goal being the inclusion task force that comes on next year. So the thing I wanted to mention about the dates is that although they're there, the reality is, like, for example, there's a training component that we have here, which is due in November. But when you look at CR10C, which is student discipline, there's a training deliverable that is in September. It's actually going to happen in November. but that's okay, because DESE realizes that there needs to be flexibility around what happens within districts. We've combined those two particular trainings into, well, we're thinking about combining them into one, or at least having them in a similar day when we have our PD. So DESE knows that for these things to happen, they have to make sure that they provide that flexibility so that it makes sense for the districts rather than keeping them to hard, fast dates. But every time that we have one of the action plan deadlines, we then need to tell them where we are in relation to those and what's going to come up next. And that just gives you the different action plan report dates. So we had already submitted one, obviously, for 10C, which was back in August. There's one coming up tomorrow for both CR3 and CR10C. Charlie and I are working on that tomorrow. Then we have a couple more that come up, with the final ones coming up in February. But if you notice, that's when the final action or the final progress update is done, but we still have deliverables that happen after that because the process needs to continue. And then at the end, DESE looks at it again to see how we're doing and then indicates whether we're done or if we need some additional remediation. So that concludes kind of the update on SPED, also on TFM. Does anybody have any particular questions that we can help to answer? Yep.
Member Castellanos, and Member Dugan.
Thank you for your presentation. My first questions are going to come around the SPED snapshot. I have a question around the overdue percent, the 9.13% of overdue IEPs. What would anyone in the room, what would be the number of students there if we...
Oh, if we do the math, so
Yeah.
3,000 something, maybe like about 300?
Okay. So why and what factors lead to this? What's the components to... I guess the factors of overdue, like IEPs, what's leading to that?
Yeah, I think part of it is during the summer. A lot of times once the school year hits back again, there's just been kind of, there's been a little break, within the time. So, and then things pick up. So my expectation is that the next time that I present on them, we're going to see some change in those numbers. But also sometimes it's, let's say, getting the IEP signed. So IEP ends up going home. It might not get signed. Chair people are obviously very busy in what they're doing. They're trying to track it down. Caregiver might say, oh yeah, I sent that in, but it doesn't happen, or it's stuck in the mail. There's a lot of different, reasons why. And some of them are just not like, they're more kind of anecdotal in a sense, but the reality is that, we're still held accountable because it's not due in that particular time. I think there's some ways that we can have some system improvements around that. Like if there's ways that we can do electronic signing, that's one way to get to individuals quicker. Sometimes too, the translation time might take a little bit of time. So that ends up, adding into the delay as well, because, somebody shouldn't be signing something that's not in the language that, that they're comfortable with. And it takes time to translate those as well. So my point is that there's lots of different reasons, but I think when we present on it again next time, it's going to be much less.
Well, I was going to ask the consent, not like the 22.13%. Like I could see the strategy behind that and
Right.
trying to get that percent lowered. I appreciate that. My next question is around outside placements. This might be a question for compliance. Could you explain through your the compliance perspective around how the journey ends up out of a student, how we end up out of district, and kind of discuss some of the mandates and some of the guidelines that we have to follow?
Happy to join Dr. Petruia. Thank you. So essentially through the IEP process, that would be a determination of the team. And so it may be that the Lynn Public Schools members of the IEP team have identified that the student needs something individually that are beyond what the district has a program to provide. It also may be that a parent or advocate may be looking for that particular outside placement. And so there, through that IEP process, individually per student, there would be a determination that placement would be determined on the IEP for some placement that doesn't exist within the district. That would be a broad overview. I'm happy to defer to Dr. Tuya as well if there's anything to add.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think always, and what I've in any district, and I've discovered it here in Lynn as well. What am I trying to say? The goal, right, is always to be able to try to find that particular programming within the district. But the reality is everybody's different. and it's hard to be able to take that uniqueness and then try to fit it into a program that's, kind of designed to be for a particular profile. Not everybody fits that. So you're going to have that situation where you end up having a program or a student that's just not going to be able to be serviced by that type of programming. So you're going to look for something that's outside. But then again, as I mentioned, sometimes what happens is that you have one student that goes here, then eventually it grows over time and you find, wow, we have like 5 or 10 students in the same type of program. Why don't we build it here? And without continually tracking that, that growth ends up happening. And then the second part, I think, that ends up happening too is that, as Charlie had mentioned, sometimes, or rather, sometimes the student might have come from a different district and then they were already in that particular type, in that placement. And there might have been some involvement from, an advocate or an attorney or whatever, and they want to keep them there. And then it ends up being a challenge to be able to, people get comfortable, to be able to gain that trust and then be able to help individuals see that, well, we have this programming here, and again, you would have to have an IEP meeting to be able to change that placement from wherever they are to something within the district. So it ends up being a bit more complex and a bit more nuanced. But that just kind of gives you a little bit of understanding about, how we end up getting to that particular point. But I do know, and especially I think Charlie can speak about it too, Lynn has what's called the BOP process. That's just for students that, let's say, if there's an emotional impairment or some type of an emotional concern, and the BOP process is one that really helps to look at FBAs, have the appropriate assessments been done, what are the different interventions that have been approached, to ensure that we're not just randomly sending somebody out of the district or to some other type of placement, that even within district we use it, but that making sure that we're going through an actual, systematic process to make sure that we're making the right type of decision.
I appreciate that. So what's I guess this might be for Dr. Shorter for later on. So what is the baseline or compared margins that we should be aiming for? I don't know, are we working to reduce outside placements? Are we looking to build up programming? What are some of the, maybe, because I look at the cost, it's expensive and we don't really get reimbursed much. If I look at $4 million, that's not a lot. So it's expensive. So what are we doing?
That's
what are,
SPED.
Okay.
Can I?
One of the next steps is facilitating a root cause.
Could you come up and speak? Sorry, you got to go in the mic. Apologize. Sorry.
So while it does sound like ideally, I think to Dr. Dotuia's point of that we want to spend less money, but at the end of the day, if it costs more money to best service our kids, that's what we want to do. But at the same time, understanding what is the root cause is we're also doing that work with schools. We're also partnering with teams to do that work as well and to understand how can we, again, be more efficient. What are the real challenges that we're experiencing when we uncover things like 22% of the challenge is about getting signatures, and where is that actually happening, or what is that real issue? Is the real fix electronic? But again, being able to dig a little deeper into the data and understand those things. But a next step in this partnership with the special education team is to conduct a root cause analysis so that we're not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions about what the challenges are.
Do you mind? I just want to give an example of, I want to give a shout out actually to the special ed department, because we have a few examples of how we brought kids back from outside placements. Coach program, teams, life skills, our hearing impaired, Fresh Start, all of those kids in the past were in outside placements. And so the special education department did do an analysis, looked at cost, looked at what can we do, and developed those programs, and now we have them in-house. And so we need to look and analyze the other students who are in outside placements and do the same thing and see, can we bring them back?
I think we had Member Dugan, Member Payette, Member Campola.
Thank you for the report. I love that we're moving toward inclusion. I think all the data, and the research is pointing toward, that's just being healthier for students, social, emotionally, academically, getting their tiered supports in the classroom is definitely the way to go. My one question would be, that is a change, right? And having our special ed teachers push in rather than pull out is a change. So what are we going to do? Are we working in time for teachers to adjust to that? Planning time, all those things need to happen to make sure we're doing that effectively. So could you talk a little bit about how that's all going to kind of play into this?
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, now I've broken it. I think that that is already been, it is already happening.
Okay.
So, and I think it's really looking at, and part of it is PD, part of it is hiring. I know Jess has been working really hard at filling a lot of the open roles that we have, not only in the SPED department, but even helping out the schools to be able to fill those roles. And we're having an unprecedented shortage around teachers, which makes it really challenging. So then when we start to build these programs or build out these classrooms, it's hard to staff them, which then becomes a whole other issue. But I think it's really, to answer your question, in terms of PD, hiring the right staff, to be able to fill those and then be able to find more opportunities. But that really is something that Lynn has been doing, and I think is really on the vanguard of, inclusion settings. And that's why you see the number in that particular way. In other districts, you really don't find that. They're really relying more on a pull-out model than on inclusion.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then one other question. Talk a little bit about you mentioned the inclusion task force coming soon. Could you kind of talk a little bit about that, what the thoughts are for that, and what that will look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to make a joke and say that's May, so I'll talk about it later, but no.
Coming soon, like I said, yeah.
But that's what we're building up to, and what the inclusion task force is going to be is just members from across different parts of the district to be able to. Well, let me take a step back. In fact, let me go to the slide. So when now it's gone. All right. So as Dr. Shorter was mentioning, we're partnering together, data and SPED, to be able to conduct a root cause analysis. I actually reached out to Dr. Shorter because she introduced the executive committee reintroduced to Fishbone. A lot of people were familiar with it, but she's really phenomenal at being able to help individuals and groups be able to do that work. So the point is that root cause analysis is going to be conducted by a cross-functional team across the district. That will then lead to an analysis or report about what our findings are. Then that plus training is then going to lead to that inclusion task force, which is going to help to keep the work, or to keep it going. After, so that once we finish this action plan, it just doesn't stop. It just keeps going.
So those people would be in-house. Those aren't.
No.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Member Pena.
My question was answered. Beautiful.
Okay.
Good work.
And I think Charlie wanted to say.
And I just wanted to add to that question. I think what the Lynn Public Schools and special education does a really good job with now is respecting that principle of least restrictive. And so prior to a student being recommended for an outsourced placement, there is a process. We have an abbreviation or acronym for it, and we're making sure that we're respecting that principle. We're making sure also that we're considering different subgroups of students, being represented equitably. But certainly, I think after the outside placement is made, the opportunity exists to, as Ruggiero said, to try to bring them back.
Great, thank you. Member Capola and then Member Magnolia.
Okay, on the question of the when a student moves into our area, we have some that eight additional or 8 fiscal, we're responsible for this. Do we have any in the reverse, like we're responsible for the program but not the fiscal?
Yes, I don't know what the number of is off the top of my head, but yes, there are a few.
Okay,
so
few. All right. And in reading the tiered focus report, the monitoring report, it talks about the eligible students 3 to 5. We're at 50%. And I'm wondering, is the problem a space issue?
Partly it's really like a denominator issue, if you think about it. So since we don't have universal pre-K, the population that's being served, it tends to be more focused or skewed towards special education rather than, the larger group. So that then presents a challenge, right, in terms of figuring out how are we going to structure these particular classrooms so that that number can be brought down. And in terms of the space is frequently ends up being a concern. I know even just the other day, Leanne Palmer, who's one of the ADs who oversees the pre-K programs, she's a very strong advocate about trying to find space, trying to plan, trying to make sure that we're forecasting, for where things are getting in the future. So I think it's multiple kind of factors at play.
Because we weren't really cited for it, but they brought attention to that. So is there any leeway on that for them understanding our space situation of how we can't really get it down if we don't have the space?
Were you going to say something, Earl? Okay, yeah. So I think I hesitate to say yes because I wasn't here when the review was conducted. But typically, my understanding is that we report the information. Then DESE ends up looking at that, and we have the ability to be able to respond. And then when we respond, that's where we can clarify things, because sometimes the data looks a particular way, but it's important to be able to understand, further beyond the numbers to see where they're actually coming from. So I believe so, yes, but I wasn't part of that process, when it happened here.
I think to Ms. Coppola, that is a really good observation, and the reason why we weren't cited for it as opposed to brought attention was because of those walkthroughs. And prior to Dr. DeTuya, Jess and I did those walkthroughs with DESE, and so the space issues were apparent. At one particular school, which I won't name, the DESE representative said, everything looks great with one exception. And I said, what is that? And they said, there's not an elevator. And so we're not, of course, cited for that, but just to give an example why some things may be pointed out but not cited, as you read well.
Yeah, and I just to chime in there, because it's a great point, and the explanation makes sense. It's also, from a bigger picture perspective, that's obviously something we've been looking to address, and we've been able to systematically be adding space and adding classrooms and adding seats to both be able to create the programming that we're required to for these students we're talking about here, and also the bigger picture goal of wanting more of our students to have access to pre-K education. So, Member Magnolia.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Out of curiosity, what percentage of SPED vacancies are there with staffing? You mentioned that there were some national shortage issues, et cetera. If you know, do we have a 10% vacancy rate of positions we're trying to still fill? Is it tiny? Is it terrifyingly large? Just tell me a little bit about the staffing issues.
I'm going to ask, I'm going to give a response, and then I'm going to also ask Jess if she might have a bit more information. But just to kind of put it into context, in the special education department, we're responsible for staffing related service providers. So we have more influence over that. And that's about 130 positions maybe. And out of that, I think there's maybe around 10 or so that are vacant. And I look to her because Jess is managing the staffing area, but she does keep an updated, sheet that has all that information that I look at periodically. So I'm trying to visualize it in my head, how many empty spaces are there. But when it comes to the actual the teachers within the buildings, that's not something that we have direct purview over. So I don't have a number, and that's where I'm thinking maybe Jess has a kind of a guesstimate around that. But she does help the buildings whenever they're asking for support or help, because she has a greater purview in terms of being able to sort of see things but again, we're not directly involved in that. Do you have any thought about district-wide, how many vacancies we might have in that area?
I'd hate to guess, but I would roughly say between 10 and 15 between the elementary to the high school level.
Yeah.
Need more inclusion teachers. And between that and speech, or keeping me busy trying to find people, and it's really difficult. So it's a challenge, but we getting there. Day by day, we're hiring as much as we can, and we're getting closer. And when we get somebody hired, we're having a celebration. It's a lot, but I think that we're going to continue to search and reach out to colleges and have we're working with the HR department as well and advertising word of mouth we do what we gotta do, so,
Thank you. Yeah, and I will say too, Jess works not only incredibly hard, but hard in the staffing area as well. And it is really difficult because sometimes too, I think we've had the experience where somebody starts or is scheduled to start and they don't because they go somewhere else. It's just very competitive, which then ends up being very disheartening because, you know, you're sort of making these plans and all of a sudden you have to shift. So sometimes that happens too, where we're shifting people around to be able to cover to make sure that students are receiving their services.
it is something that we're hearing from all the districts as well. And the out-of-district placements, everybody's struggling to find.
I just want to share, Member Magnolia, that overall, as of today, Human Resources we get biweekly updates. And I mean twice a week, not every other week. We are at 81 teacher vacancies overall across the district. So if Jess is looking at, 15 to 20, that's still a relatively small percentage of the 1,495 total teachers that we have. So we're almost at 95% total staffing.
Thank you.
Just wondering about, on the special ed teachers, what's the percentage of certified?
So total numbers, we can definitely get you a breakdown of the total SPED certified, and those, of course, I think it's important which ones are also emergency certified, because we have both, and we're working, to develop professional development to address those needs as well.
I'll actually tag on to that. Deb Morrell, who works in our curriculum department for educator quality, actually just had a session yesterday or the day before with a number of special education teachers who are on waivers to work on them getting their license. So we have an active plan. Deb's working really hard. I know there's special ed department people that are working with her on that. We have staff who are mentoring these teachers and working with them. So there is a plan of action on the teachers who are on waivers to get them licensed.
Very good.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Next item is a request to accept a donation from the Lynn Rotary Club of a buddy bench to Fallon Elementary School. It's a recommendation of the superintendent.
Yes, it is. Very excited about this one.
Great. It's the will of the committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Field trip request from classical basketball team to Orlando from Thursday, December 14th to Monday, December 18th. It's a recommendation of the superintendent.
I am asking this be tabled to the October 12th meeting. We are still missing some field trip documentation, but we anticipate having all of the documents in order before the next school committee meeting.
Make a motion to table.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. We received a request to cancel the 15th regular meeting on October 26th because of a community event at the same time, and are bringing that to the committee.
I'll make a motion to cancel the 15th regular meeting scheduled for October 26, 2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Ratification of votes taken in the Building Grounds Subcommittee meeting. Member Castellanos.
Mayor Nicholson, yes, we had a vote to allow Lynn Community Health Center to utilize space at Pickering Middle School. It was a motion to put it to the full committee. I believe open up the floor for discussion.
Second? Make a second on your motion.
Yep, second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Castellanos?
Yes.
Member Capola?
Yes.
Member Dugan?
Yes.
Member Gately? Absent. Member Magnolia?
Yes.
Member Pena?
Yes.
Mayor Nicholson?
Yes. And that takes us to the superintendent's report.
And I know you're all thrilled and excited to hear what I have to say this evening. So as we approach the end of the first month of school, we emphasize the focus of the coherence framework. And we take great pride in the concerted efforts and commitment to accelerate student learning. This commitment is central to our educational approach with a steadfast focus on grade level instruction, ensuring that every precious minute in classrooms count. We celebrate and cultivate learning environments with high expectations where students and educators are encouraged to strive for excellence. Our collective focus remains squarely on teaching and learning in our journey as a community of learners. As we zero in on the goals of the professional learning communities and instructional leadership teams, our primary emphasis is on mastering English language development standards. We're so excited about this work, and that's across all content areas, thereby supporting our English language learners in their academic pursuits. This targeted approach aligns with the research on effective instructional practices and the importance of pedagogical shifts towards student-centered learning, as evidenced and cited by scholars like Dr. John Hattie, who's an education researcher. Furthermore, with the recently released MCAS 2023 results, we have valuable insight and data that will empower us to enhance our instructional strategies for all schools. We want to recognize and celebrate all our students' success and commend Lynn Woods for ranking among the 66 schools recognized by DESE as a school of recognition. We are committed to a culture of rigorous data use, data literacy, and evidence-based decision-making. We will use data in this pursuit. We have forged a strategic partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education Strategic Data Project, which will provide us with expert guidance and mentorship. This partnership will leverage transformative data initiatives to advance critical educational objectives as we eagerly anticipate receiving action-oriented insights and that will inform our policies and practices. This network allows for exchanging best practices, rigorous research findings, statistical methodologies, and innovative ideas. Together, we approach the complex, multi-year work of improving education with a commitment to excellence and a shared vision of a brighter future for students and community. Our new partnership with the Harvard Graduate School of Education Strategic Data Project is a testament to our dedication to data-driven decision-making by working closely with renowned faculty, mentors, and Dr. Tom Kane from the Center for Research at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. We're tapping into their expertise and benefiting from their guidance in leveraging data to drive meaningful change. The transformative data projects we undertake will catalyze improvements in various facets of our educational system, from curriculum development to teacher professional development. Our commitment to fostering an inclusive and culturally responsive educational environment remains resolute, recognizing that diversity is our strength, and we will be consistent, curious, optimistic, celebrating small and big wins. In closing, during this month of celebration, Hispanic Heritage Month, we take a moment to honor and recognize the invaluable contributions of our diverse community. We appreciate all students, staff, teachers, and administrators bringing unique perspectives and linguistic richness to our schools. As a Latina, I take great pride in representing this community and the students and staff who identify as Hispanic. Justice Sonia Sotomayor from our Supreme Court stated that Latina in me is an ember that blazes forever. Her words are moving and true to me. All of us, whether we identify as white or as Black, Indigenous, persons of color, have a responsibility to use the power of our voice to make changes that improve the quality of life for others and open doors of opportunities for their families. This is how we thread ourselves into the American dream. I stand on the shoulder of giants with role models to thank who shaped my life, and I also hope to be an example for our students of how a non-English speaking first-generation American can pursue college and the career of their dreams. I sincerely hope that the embers and passion for improving student achievement are contagious and help inspire others. We can and we will have all students succeed in Lynn. The future of Lynn is brilliant. El futuro de Lynn es brillante.
Thank you.
See no further business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.